This week's podcast proves to be a little bit different, but I'm excited to do it because it involves someone who is part of a trio of 3 individuals who run a very large, very successful, and very well-followed podcast in Brazil. The difference is that this podcast does not revolve around the hosts. You will never see the hosts' faces, and their identities are completely hidden. And they do that because they want to make the subject matter all important. So if you listen to this podcast or watch this podcast, you can pretty much close your eyes because I want you to focus on the conversation. Don't focus on myself as a real estate broker. Don't focus on the other individual as a podcaster. Just tune in and think about the dialogue that we're having. It was enlightening to me, and it was refreshing to be able to look at this without the subjectivity of thinking about another human being and who they are and where they come from and their standing in society. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did shooting it. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
At the peak of my career, so to speak, is when I finally realized there was this emptiness inside me and I just couldn't explain where it came from.
Would I find people in this neighborhood that I would feel I would be able to sit with on a Friday night and tell them I flipped my car on a straight road?
The world is an outer projection of an inner condition. Too much pleasure will affect your happiness. Whatever the past learning we had is not going to be very useful for the challenges of the futures.
How do we prepare? How do people get ready for a changing world? Welcome back to, this is the 65th episode of the Better Decisions podcast. I'm here with a guest, which is going to be unusual because this guest, you'll notice straight away, his face has been blurred out. Now, it's not because he's wanted by the CIA. It's because this particular individual, who we will call Larry Go, that is his
alter ego,
is the creator, guest, one of the 3 guests of a podcast in Brazil, which translates as Elephants in the Mist. And we're going to get into this and understand why it's called Elephants in the Mist, what the podcast is. But just to give you a framework for this podcast, you're on your 109th episode.
Right.
You have a very good and broad listening base. You've done, stuff in national press. You've appeared on interviews numerous times in Brazil. And obviously a lot of people want to know who you are. But to protect your identity, we're not going to show your face. But what we are going to do is get into a subject, which I think is something that you've spoken about extensively, and maybe it frames what you do and what I happily try to do with this podcast with the title Better Decisions, is helping people navigate their decision-making, navigate what they're going through in their life and what you're experiencing in your life and what the other guests are experiencing, what you've read, what you've understood. And what we were talking off camera before this, which is, I'm going to title it Navigating Our Environment with Better Decisions. Whatever you want to make of that. What I'd love you to do is introduce yourself, obviously under your pseudonym, but most importantly, explain what the podcast is in Brazil, what you do, and then we'll just kind of dive in.
I would say the podcast goes a little bit beyond the decision-making process. It's more like examining your life. I think it was Socrates who said an unexamined life is not worth living. So what we do is we don't come up with answers, but we raise a lot of questions. And by raising questions, it makes you somehow re-examine your life, try to see your life from a different angle every day, which keeps you from repeating patterns, because the moment you stop and you observe your life from a different angle, it makes you think, oh, maybe I don't have to spend so much time changing everything around me. I just have to change the lens through which I'm watching my life. So we created the podcast in the middle of the pandemic. We were 3 friends who basically have very different backgrounds, and we used to sit down just the way we are here now, and we would discuss life, discuss our challenges, discuss the things that we're reading, things that we're coming across, and we just since we couldn't get together during the pandemic, we thought, okay, let's record it. We never thought that anybody was going to be interested in listening. Let's record it. And at that time, we felt like elephants, especially because it was so hard to move around. And the mist is because nothing was clear, right? So we were just trying to find a light to follow. And the light would come from those conversations. So we pretty much did it for us, and that's how it started. And obviously, it became a conversation that in the beginning, we didn't, like I said, I didn't think that would be interesting for other people, but I guess people had very similar questions. So, and that's how it started and how it began growing, very slowly, but steadily.
It's gained a lot of momentum. Yeah. I definitely see you as a journeyman, someone who's always searching, always trying to learn, move forward. And obviously there's a lot of personal experiences that have driven you to this place, that drive you forward, even to run the podcast now for 109 episodes, to go through this, to be driven by this. I'd love to understand a little bit of your background, and certainly just for those who are watching this, to help frame this conversation. What are your origins?
I think my story is not very special. I mean, I come from a middle class, very, I would say, dysfunctional environment, family-wise, very challenging. So it was always, I was always looking for a playbook. How do I find harmony in my life? How do I get out of this hypervigilance? And control was the first thing that came to mind. So I had very little control over my life, and I said, okay, let me stick to the things that I can control, which is basically I'm going to study hard, work hard, and eventually, there must be a pot of gold in the end of this rainbow, which in my mind was, whatever you want to call money, freedom, power, whatever. So I joined the business school. It was a good business school in Brazil, and I joined the financial markets. And I pretty much got into this automatic mode, trying to gain more space in the market, validation from my peers, more power, and therefore, obviously, more money. And until a point where things began to make less sense based on my initial prediction, which was, once I have all those things, I will be finally happy and in peace. And what happened was at the peak of my career, so to speak, is when I finally realized there was this emptiness inside me, and I just couldn't explain where it came from because I was doing everything right, at least based on the playbook that I designed. So, and back then there was not many people that I could talk to about that, especially in the environment that I was in, where performance, productivity and money at the end of the day was the only metric for success. So it was a little bit of a very confusing moment, and I started to look for alternatives, to explain what I was thinking. And I think that's how this second part of my life started, so to speak. Yeah.
It's interesting because the environment, and again this focus, you're in very cognizant of your environment now, and you're in an environment, and typically when we think of Brazil is a country that's been through a lot. It's been through dictatorship, it's been through hyperinflation, it's been through changes in power, which for different opinions have been, there's been corruption, there's been a schism of let's say wealth across the country. You've got a definite division between the haves and the have-nots. To some, it might be considered a slightly more hostile environment than, say, parts of the US. Seeing that you've got people trying to navigate their environment to try to find peace. The conversations that you have with people coming on, and just to understand, with your podcast, you engage with a third party to come on and talk during your podcast and engage with you and the other hosts, correct?
We don't actually have many guests. It's mostly a conversation between the three of us. Sometimes when we have guests is for in a specific topic. And now we're actually opening a new branch that's going to be interviews only, which is going to be conducted by me. It's called Go on the Go. And the idea is actually to, when we have a topic that we can go a little deeper, we'll have a guest that can actually explain things that are not clear to us. But it started, and I think most of the 110 episodes were just the three of us talking.
Do you find with these conversations, as you're addressing the realities that you're in, the things that you're reading, the things that you're seeing, are you seeing more challenges within the environment? Are you seeing a greater level of hostility? You started just during the pandemic, which was a very challenging time. That, if anything, would be considered a pretty hostile environment. How do you see things evolving right now as you go through this process? What are you observing?
You mean in terms of changes in me or changes in the environment?
I would say, we had this conversation off camera when we started, that when we talk about our realities, our environment, there's our environment externally of what we see, for example, in real estate, where we live, who we're surrounded with, who our friends are, who our co-workers are, who the people that we see out on the street are, the environment that we exist. And again, just to frame what the environment is that we're talking about, the economic environment, the political environment, everything, every external force that affects us on a day-to-day basis. And then our mental state, the environment of our mental state as it pertains between our two ears.
Yeah. That's a great topic. I think the external environment always plays a role. And maybe the biggest challenge is how do you actually can train yourself by many different ways, through observation, through what we spoke about before, upgrading your internal software. So those external challenges affect you less and less and affect your decision-making less and less. It's almost like you create a little separation, a little space between stimulus and reaction.
So when you say, go into a little bit deeper to explain what you consider stimulus, and then the variable reactions that you might,
Okay, let's say if you are. The stimulus is whatever happened outside in your external environment that will affect you. And there is a period of time that could last for a millisecond to a minute, not exactly in terms of time, but in terms of how much time internally you have to process before you react. The less trained your mind is, more reactive you're going to be. Mm-hmm. And by training your mind, I mean, there are many ways to do that, but from meditation to learning more about your patterns, learning more about the way your mind works. There are many studies that show that, the space that we believe that we have for the freedom we have to make decisions, it is much smaller than it actually is. There is your biases, your past, the way you're raised, where you're raised, transgenerational trauma, even traumas that you don't remember, that are somehow stored in your unconscious mind, and you're running a program that most of the time you're not even aware of.
So your reactions are not your own. Your reactions are a byproduct of your subconscious and your programming.
And your environment and many other things. So the more you learn about yourself, I would say the less reactive you become. It's almost like when we discussed earlier, the the different parts of the brain, and I'm not a neuroscientist or anything of the sort, but just based on my experience, we tend to go to survival mode very easily. Yeah. The reptilian brain, the less intelligent part of the brain, the survival mode. And we tend to activate that in situations where, yes, it made sense, 100,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago when there was a real threat to our lives. But now, every time we are challenged, we activate that part of the brain. So how do you create space so you can make
time to process properly? So our decision-making, if I'm hearing you right, our decision-making instincts are not serving us very well in the modern era. And so when we're getting into this reflex to a problem, just reacting to a problem, processing, and especially now with a lot of what we call input, there seems to be more input in the world, whether it's through this and through other information, just input overload coming in, that it kind of, fries our brain to help or stop us from making better decisions in our day-to-day because we've just got too much to filter and we can't filter enough of it.
Yeah. I think there's no question that we're going to enter challenging times. I mean, we can tell, especially if you are in certain places of the world, you're already going through that. You mentioned Brazil. Brazil has been challenging since forever. I think it's never been easy there.
It's always the land of the
it's
country of tomorrow.
It's a training camp. So, and I think maybe the U.S. is beginning to see those challenges coming up. Obviously, we see the world divided everywhere across the board.
I'll go into that because polarization, and again, I sit in a very, and just to be clear, I sit in a very small microcosm of the US. I sit in Miami, which is a bubble in itself. It's not a reality that most of the other states experience. And I have this conversation every day with someone who will say to me, okay, what's the Miami real estate market like, which is what you do for a living? You're talking to people every day, dealing with decision making, and that's why the podcast is called Better Decisions, because people struggle, and they are struggling with making decisions for where they're going to live, what their environment should look like, what they want their environment to look like, what they think they need, and what they actually need sometimes don't actually mesh. And as things change so fast, and you mentioned changing, let's say the new world order, the change in the world around us, it becomes ever increasingly difficult to navigate these challenges and these decisions that we have to make that we believe will better us, but will they necessarily better us or not?
Yeah, and I think it's a question of where you are making the decisions from. What is your state of mind to make those decisions? The more challenging the times, the less time, or if you don't really train your mind, the chances of making what we call a good decision are slim. It's slim. Example, if you're anxious or if you're in fear, the chances are you'll be activating your reptilian brain because you perceive that challenge as a direct threat to your survival. It might not be a direct threat to your life, but the brain doesn't understand that way. It will understand, okay, this is going to change my status quo. I have to defend it. And our first reaction is, I have to fix what's happening outside of me. I have to move. I have to escape. I have to, if it's a challenge with your family or my kid, I have to change my kid. It's a teenager. She's reacting a lot, and I need to change her. I need to fix her. I need to fix everything on the outside. And the problem is, the more challenging the outside is, it's going to be even more complicated for you to make those decisions from a good place, unless you actually start training yourself to create that space where you can have a chance to migrate to the smarter part of your brain, which is something that it takes time and changing your habits.
Where you're saying, and you started to go into this, and I want to go into it deeper now, is you talked about the environment is changing, the world is changing, and you kind of alluded to the fact that we were heading into a direction right now, the US, where it's going to have some big obstacles to deal with. As you see it, as you're observing the people that you're talking to, where are you seeing those challenges arise, and what are they going to manifest and look like?
I think there are some obvious ones that for a linear mind is really hard to understand exponential changes. Obviously, you have AI or AGI, whatever you want to call it, which we have absolutely no idea how it's going to affect our lives. We have a perception that's going to be a big shift, but we can't really understand to what extent it will affect our everyday life. We have definitely climate, for whatever reason. It's beginning to play a more significant role, especially in the economy, in migration, which also affects economy. There is the level of inequality in the world, not only in the U.S., that's reaching standards that very concerning. And everything I'm saying is not anything new. You have like many people talking about it, Ray Dalio or Yuval Harari, and all those things, and the polarization that you mentioned. Why did we get to that point? Is that a precursor to transformation? Do we actually have to reach conflict to actually change the status quo? And that's something that I question myself all the time. So we have many different fronts that will affect the way we live our lives today. Some countries are already going through that, but I think in the next 2 years we're going to see a lot of that really across the board. So, and if you think the rational mind will always try to use past experiences to fix the new challenges or to address the new challenges. And my impression is that whatever we learn, whatever the past learning we had, is not going to be very useful for the challenges of the future. So there is a great quote by Sadhguru, who is I don't know if you're familiar with him. There's a great interview between him and Joe Rogan. But Sadhguru wrote this book called Inner Engineering, which is pretty much about how do you actually upgrade that software, the internal software, so you can actually be ready for those changes and access the smartest part of your brain to make decisions.
I mean, preparing yourself to upgrade your software, as you put it, to deal with challenges that we're not really experienced to deal with because we haven't dealt with them before. And you said history allows us to learn from our past, but however, it doesn't prepare us for what's to come. And if you're right in this, then how do we prepare? How do people get ready for a changing world, given the fact that, again, I think Miami's had a little glimpse of, as I've experienced it from my own experiences, where we've seen migration come from New York and California. We've seen political tensions rise. We've seen the polarization with the Democrats and the Republicans, and we've definitely seen a schism, the growth gap, the wealth gap, between the haves and the have-nots has reached levels now where, we sit in Miami, and it's not uncommon to see $100 million transactions, as wild as that may sound. And we run neck and neck with New York now with some of these incredible numbers. But the reality is the majority of the population come nowhere near being able to afford a property at 2 million, never mind 100 million. So when that happens, that new challenge, that new friction that's generated within the environment, and it does seem to be friction. This friction seems to mount. How do we release the valve here and let some of the pressure off? Or do we have to just wait for the top to blow off the kettle pot and then deal with some uncomfortable aftermath before we can find balance again?
And that's exactly what we try to do at the podcast, to raise those questions, because the answer is not obvious, never is obvious, especially because we all facing certainly different challenges, and we're looking at what you described is very accurate. And I wonder exactly, how do we do that? And the way that my impression is that the world is an outer projection of an inner condition. So what we seen out there somehow is within us as well. So it all starts by examining yourself. And before you try to change the world, you have to look inside and say, okay, where is there attack thoughts in me? Is there, am I vibrating in lack? What is actually happening within me? That's the first thing you have to do. Examine your life, examine yourself. Because once you do that, you'll see that a lot of changes happens in your environment, in your family, in your relationships.
It starts from within, kind of philosophy.
And the near proximity, everything that's around you. Because we all have this neural pathways in every relationship. When I see you, what I see is the past, always. What I see is everything that I learn about you. When we sit down here, that's your track record. That's the database I have about you. If I'm willing to have a fresh look and not use the past experiences or the past learning, the first reaction is going to be, I'm going to be curious about you. What are the aspects of David that I might have overseen because I was so committed to confirming all the biases I had.
I was going to say, I was literally going to say, so you remove, and again, easier said than done, remove the bias. If you can remove the bias of your preconceived ideas about someone, you're giving a fighting chance to carve a new path.
Yeah, and who would you be without the beliefs I have about you? That's something that Chris Voss, who was the author of Never Split the Difference.
I was going to say, great book.
Great book, and he was a volunteer at the Suicide Hotline, and I mentioned to you that that's something that I ended up doing back home as well, and I've learned a lot.
Let's go into that a little bit, because that's not something that people do every day, especially not someone who's followed on the surface, an individual who has become wealthy, an individual who's managed to is constantly searching, but someone who, usually in the environment, you're trying to find ways to avoid stress, to move away from it. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable is something that certain people do. And again, you see it in athletes and you see it with certain high achievers with a certain mindset. Leaning into that, going and joining a suicide hotline, that's definitely leaning into the uncomfortable and what would be perceived by many as adding more stress to your life. What made you do that? And how and what was the result of you actually doing it, more importantly?
The real reason why I did it, I would only learn a few months down the road. But I thought I had joined it because I really wanted to understand the concept of active listening, active hearing other people, and which is completely new to me, because every time I was taught to, while someone was talking to me, to at the same time analyze everything and have an answer ready.
Yeah, they call it verbal tennis,
yes.
Where someone talks, they wait for the other one to finish so that they can make their point, and so you bounce back and forth.
Yeah, because we see that every interaction as a debate. And what that taught me was more towards, okay, I don't have to agree with you, but I can understand where you're coming from. Like, I get you. And that works in any interaction. And I think that's true empathy.
Negotiation does that. Actually, Chris Voss talks about teeing someone up for them. It's like doing a layup in, let's say, volleyball, where you're actually laying them up to be able to go deeper, to allow them to express themselves better.
And that especially works with teenagers. So
good to know. Good to know.
Because in the end of the day is, we all have this inner child, that wants to be heard, wants to have a space, wants to be seen, I think that's where the ego.
So you're going beyond just communication, but it's almost like once you start to communicate with your environment, everything external to you, but actually listen to communicate.
And once you listen,
you can start making internal changes.
And actually, when you have an interaction, the way we described earlier, with someone who you've known for a long time and you completely disagree with everything that person stands for, but you actually position yourself to actively listening to that person. And you might say, okay, I mean, I still don't agree with you, but I understand where you're coming from. I mean, obviously, Chris Voss goes, in much more detail in the book, but my experience was, what I learned is everyone has a belief, and they build their life around that belief. And they will defend that belief because that belief becomes their identity. And that could take that person to the extreme.
Doesn't that shine the light on exactly what we've seen in the US, this gigantic polarization between two major parties where neither will be willing to accept a middle ground because it compromises them in some way or feels that it compromises them in some way?
That's precisely what's happening. And I think it's that room for active listening to the other side it has really disappeared. Almost like if you're willing to do that, if you're not with me, you are my enemy. And so what we try to do at the podcast, and the three of us have different views on many different topics. We try to actually practice that a lot, say, okay, and in the beginning it wasn't like that. I mean, when we started the podcast, I could tell that there was a lot of tension. It was combative because I wanted to prove my point and they wanted to prove their points. And it was only after I would listen to what we recorded, I would go, oh, actually what he said does make a little sense. Maybe I should look into that. And I started using the podcast for my own sake.
As an exercise to find that happy medium.
And you can tell, from the beginning to where we are now, there was a completely different atmosphere, and people can really perceive that. And it's not everybody who likes that. A lot of people miss the combat.
Is that because they've been conditioned to believe that that's how they have to act, rather than what you're framing now? And we see it again, media seems to have a play out there in the general world, and we see it, I'm in the world of real estate, but I see media pushing an agenda, and what we always know, and again, whether I'm negotiating a real estate transaction between a buyer and a seller, there's your version, my version, and the truth somewhere in between. And the truth somewhere in between is the key in order to find balance, because like Voss will say, there can be winners on both sides. You don't have to have a winner or a loser. The winner is realizing that you can see a wider perspective than just your own. When you were on that hotline, when you were on that suicide hotline, and you were talking to individuals, and again, this isn't an exercise, this is someone's actual life or death that you're talking about. When you're navigating those dialogues, as it progressed, as you did it more, how did you feel? What did you learn? And what was unexpected? What did you go, I didn't see that coming?
Well, first of all, for me, it was the training was very counterintuitive. It was, I remember the first day of training, they showed a situation and they asked us, how would you deal with that? And I raised my hand and said, this is obvious. And the instructor pretty much came back to the group and said, that's exactly the last thing you can do. And because we have this perception that we can save people, and the fact that that's not the reason why you're there for. You're there basically to help the person hear themselves. Once they can listen to themselves out loud, and they will somehow, something clicks, and they will question the belief. You don't really have to do anything. You're just holding space. You're holding space. You're present. You can show love, but only through energy, because you can't really say anything. You can't get personal. You don't even know where the person is. You can't send help. All you have is those minutes to help that person listen to themselves and maybe conclude that, okay, maybe I have a belief that is worth questioning. And that's all you can do. And in the everyday life, sometimes it's pretty much all you can do. You know, you're not a rescuer. You're just a person that is there to help the other person make a better decision. And by listening actively and helping the person listen to themselves.
Yeah, that process of understanding that when someone's coming on the line and saying, I want to kill myself, they don't really want to kill themselves. What they learn in that process of what they want is they want to be heard, and they want to feel that they're not invisible and that they matter. And I think when I think about the environment, and again, I think about this a lot being in the job that I'm in, I think about the neighborhoods, I think about the people, and I think about what people say they want and what they really want and what they need. They're trying to express to me in terms of something that might be material. Mm-hmm. I'm going to describe to you, this is what I want. I want a 5-bedroom house. I want an acre. I want X, Y, and Z. But what they're really saying is, these are the things I need to feel at peace. I need space. I need somewhere that I can make my kids happy. I need somewhere where I can not waste my time doing things that I shouldn't be doing or that I don't want to do, that I can get from work to school to home efficiently. And that I spend my time, things that make me happy can actually be accomplished by being in this particular spot. It's less than just the bricks and mortar and more about, like you always say, it's a feeling. Mm-hmm. And maybe right now there's a lot of feeling that people have of discontent and challenge, environmental, things that are going on that are making people scared, nervous, anxious. The subjects that you're looking at right now, the things that grab you, and I'm just trying to go a little bit deeper now, the things that grab hold of you, that you think about and go, are there any moments where you go, okay, there are some rules to a happy environment that I have learnt, that maybe I know what I don't want, but these are things that I figured out now after so many years on the planet that I know don't serve me well, or don't maybe serve any human well?
Yeah, I think there is a question that I like to ask myself. And I know that you're a big fan of Simon Sinek, and he's a big why guy.
Yes.
But I like the what for better than the why.
Okay, explain that.
The why sometimes is not, to me, is not clear enough. The what for, it's like a deeper layer. You know, okay, I want a house because what for? I need to get that car. I say, why do you need a car? Because I need a better car, because, you know, I have a certain position. But the what for is, how does that somehow
fulfill you?
Not fulfill me, but it's always about what the ego gets from that.
Okay, so you're talking to the ego directly.
I am talking to the ego directly, and I'm having a very open conversation. And it's sometimes I don't change my decision, but at least I'm conscious about my decision.
You're honest with yourself.
So like the other day, I bought a car, and I said, "Well, why did you buy a car?" Well, because I could, or because I. But what for? Oh, maybe. Oh, yeah. When I was younger, you know, I wanted my dad to drive me to school in a better car, and I want my kids to feel the same way. So the what for is clear to me. Does that mean that I didn't buy the car? No, I did buy the car still, but at least I'm conscious about it, and I can start addressing that inner child and say, okay. Yeah. Because in the end of the day, I'm using my kids.
That's a useful exercise. That what for, and I would challenge anyone out there who listens to the podcast and is thinking to myself, all right, so David, you normally do podcasts talking about real estate. Why are we going down this rabbit hole? It seems it's becoming clear to me now in focus that why you do anything, and again, big decision-making things in your life, whether it's buying a house, buying a car, getting married, moving from one state to another, really exploring the what for is going to ultimately put you in a position where the result is a better one for you and you'll be happier. It's a better decision to look at the what for than just the why.
And it's okay if in the process of investigating the what for, you come to the conclusion that it wasn't exactly what you expected, and you're still going to make that decision. But just like, Carl Jung says, until you bring the unconscious conscious, you're going to live life calling, fate or destiny or whatever, because it's, you're running a program that you're not aware of. So once you bring that to the conscious mind and say, okay, maybe I'm not ready to make that change yet, but at least I'm conscious about it. And I might not repeat the same pattern. I'm not, buy a second car or buy a plane or whatever.
Is that the accumulation where we see, money doesn't make you happy kind of conversation that happens when people don't do the what for? They just assume, maybe because they grew up in an environment where they were programmed to be told, if you're going to be happy, you need to have the biggest house and the most number of cars and the plane and the jet, and you just got to keep going. And then you'll get to a point where you're going to like yourself and you're going to be liked by other people.
Yeah. And I think that has a lot to do with the metric that we use to define what we need. We underestimate how our metric can be distorted. Example, you mentioned, I need to have a bigger car or a bigger house or more cars or accumulate money. And at the end of the day, if you look at your life from that perspective, there's always comparison is the end of joy, right? I mean, You're always going to be comparing yourself to someone who's got more. So that metric has a predefined ending, so to speak. Once you look back into the metric you're using and you actually look at your life and you go, okay, maybe, first of all, you're always looking at a perspective of your peers that is very superficial. You don't know exactly what's going on in anybody's.
Yeah, the illusion of where you think people's success
especially
is.
with social media. I mean, what we get is, just the tip of the iceberg. So the question is, when you look and say, okay, what do I value the most? Do I value being close to my family? Do I value, am I actually close enough to my kids to know how they feel? Because what you might realize is that you have a lot. And by not knowing that, you're compensating with external material. I'm not saying that you shouldn't get anything. I'm just saying that once you examine the metric, you will have a chance to have a better perspective of what you really need. Sometimes you'll say, okay, maybe I can have another, I can have a trip to Europe or whatever, to whatever place you want to go, but not because I want to post those pictures on my Instagram, but I have a chance to actually be with my family and experience something new and be present with them and actually make it like a family trip, a real family trip. So you can actually go to the same place, but just by being present and changing the lenses, you make a completely different trip.
Do you see in your podcast and obviously in your environment how people become desensitized to having abundance? They are chasing so much of it that they get it and then it just becomes a nothing. It becomes I chased this thing for so long. I was on that journey. It meant a lot to me, but I got it. And then now I've got it. I don't feel anything. I feel nothing. I get into my $400,000 sports car that I was so driven to buy, and I just drive it to the supermarket now and I feel nothing. And I'm now busy looking for the next thing.
I don't think it's any different from any other dopamine rush.
It's a dopamine response.
It is, because and obviously, the dopamine receptors, once they get used more and more, Hacking the American Mind is this book by this the Dr. Robert Lustig that shows how those dopamine kicks or increments affects in the long term the serotonin levels. So it's almost like too much pleasure will affect your happiness. And he explains that in detail in the book.
It almost numbs you.
Almost numbs you. Yeah, like any other thing. So we are, and it feels like it's the only way. It's no different from the dopamine rush coming from Instagram or buying a house or getting on a trip or exotic trip or going to a club and spending thousands of dollars in. It's not very different. In the end of the day, is you're looking for that dopamine rush. The other side of that coin is, okay, that's not going to be permanent. We know that for a fact. And after you get a dopamine rush, what happens is you get a bit depressed, right?
It's the counterbalance.
You need more to fulfill that. So once you start examining yourself the way we described earlier, I think you have a better shot at moving from dopamine to serotonin. And I'm not an expert. It's just something that, I came across and I thought it was very, very interesting because I never realized that, but it makes total sense.
Yeah, when you think about the idea that, okay, everything that you're going to experience will give you a little bit of a hit of dopamine. And it's okay to accept the fact that it is going to have a softening effect. The key is finding the balance to say, all right, what are we chasing here? Well, we're chasing really happiness. What does happiness look like? How do we frame it in the right way, knowing that it's okay to get a little excited by things and get that little bump of adrenaline that you get from the dopamine, but just accept the fact that if your goal is happiness, you're going to have to go around that a different way. You're going to have to take a different path around the mountain to get there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this whole process of, asking yourself the right questions. And you might come to the conclusion that, I'm doing that because I want a dopamine rush, And
you're an adrenaline junkie and you just want that hit.
But just the fact that you actually bring in that to consciousness. And I honestly believe that at this point where we are, there's going to be so many opportunities to get those dopamine kicks, especially AI is going to play a huge role on that. So it will be tricky, especially for the younger people, I guess.
Oh, I mean, we're trying to navigate that now with kids, and that's just the reality that we're dealing with because we're living in a world that we're not prepared for. I think one of the things that a lot of parents think about in families, and I deal with this every day with people moving into Miami as a family unit, is how am I going to navigate my environment to give a better life, not for me, but for my kids? Am I putting them in the right place? And the more you look at this, the more we start to see that it starts from here rather than out here. How you frame the conversations, how you help them deal with things, how you allow them to, let's say, have a phone or not have a phone, certain responses, and the environment that they're also in, the school that they go to, the neighborhood that you live in, the friends that you have, and the time that you spend with them and what you're doing. One of the things I noticed that I think is probably the big driving force that I saw when people decided to move environment to be happier, to make a better decision, and this is the frame of maybe everything, which is people moving from one environment to another to be happier. And were they making a good decision in doing that? Was it a better decision? And if that decision environmentally is long-term, is it sustainable long-term? But with everything changing around, people moved. The world is changing very, very quickly. Miami's changing very, very quickly. Brazil is constantly evolving like every country. Politicians making different decisions, the economy different things, inflation, all these things. Navigating our internal systems in order to find harmony in what feels pretty chaotic right now. A lot of people are, I don't say paralyzed from making decisions, but I notice it more in the last year where no one feels super confident about making big life changes sometimes, because there's a lot of hostile flags in the environment, a lot of triggers pushing it. Thinking of what you would say to those people in order to, what's the first step in your experience of what you've had in conversations with your podcast and people coming to you? What is a healthy step to address disharmony right now in your life?
Good point. And that's a great question, because if you are living in internal chaos, the external chaos makes you feel better.
Interesting.
Because you don't feel like you're the only one.
Yeah, misery loves company.
Exactly. So I think that explains a little bit why we're, toying with extreme measures the way we have been doing for the past at least couple of years. We talk about, nuclear war like it's nothing. We talk about war, conflict, civil war, whatever, like it's,
almost desensitized to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you see what goes on the news and
it's almost like it's a solution to get us out of pain. It's very counterintuitive. But
it's bad for me, but it's a lot worse for them.
Or it's bad for everyone now. I'm not alone.
Yeah.
So one thing that I noticed, especially, I always look at myself, as the prime example. If I look at the news, if I start feeding myself off, what the media wants to portray, what's the wolf that I'm feeding? So sometimes what I think it makes sense is to step away from that and start looking to alternatives. And there are so many good podcasts out there, especially here in the U.S. A few of them that I strongly recommend that will bring conversations about, how you improve that internal software.
Yeah.
How you upgrade that internal software. There is Know Thyself. There's one with Tommy Simon. What is it called? Sounds True. There is, Joe Dispenza. There is Michael Singer. Those guys are actually almost bringing up the questions and the training and the literature and the conversations that actually help you navigate those challenges completely different, and I think that's very accessible. It's growing a lot. I notice, this kind of conversation that we're having now, wouldn't take place 20 years ago for sure. There would be no audience.
Yeah. These positive reinforcements that come from hope, come from looking forward, being positive. And
I don't even think it's being
that.
positive. It's actually, how can I see things differently? How can I not buy things at face value? I'm not going to feed off fear, anxiety, Well,
there's usually something being sold in the process. Weird, I don't want to sound nefarious over these things, but there's usually a lot of communication that comes with an agenda. And whether it's mainstream media or otherwise, there's, we even see it, obviously, it's not just mainstream media. We go to YouTube and you can listen to certain podcasts, you can hear certain experts talking, but at the end they go, and if you want to know more, buy my book, or most importantly, buy my supplement, this course, that course, and there's an agenda for profiting. And it's nice when your podcast, there's no reason or direct profiting in this process. You're not trying to sell something.
No, we're not trying to sell anything. We're just trying, like I said, we're trying to raise questions, and sometimes most of the answers will come from the listeners.
And you build a hugely positive community because of that. And I think that's probably the most applaudable and positive thing I certainly feel from having started my podcast. We're on the 65th episode. You're on the 110th. So you're literally like, 50 ahead of me. But the positive reinforcement to myself, the gift to myself from having done this outweighs, if no one heard a single episode, it's impacted me massively. And it's given me hope, and I've recognized with great people coming on that there is this desire to build positive community to help us all in our mental state or in our environment, internal, external, bringing everyone together and having a really honest conversation with ourselves, saying, hey, I'm as messed up as everyone else, but I want to get better.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I tend to use my examples, my challenges all the time, because we like to make it very tangible for everyone to relate to those stories, so they know they're, not, it doesn't happen only to them, but because we all face the same challenges.
We're all human. It's very humanizing.
Yeah, it's very humanizing. So once we bring that up, and people, it's a very lonely place when we start raising those questions, and you don't have anybody to talk to. And you go, oh, maybe, I'm not alone. I mean, what happened to me happened to this guy on the podcast. And then you see the comments, many other people can relate. And from that, it's almost like a community that's willing to, see things from a different perspective. And what does that mean in terms of you evolving as a human being, as a person, as a father, as a husband, as a businessman? Yeah. Because we all have our micro environments that are deeply affected by our behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned to me before we were having lunch and we were talking about this, and you go, I suffer from imposter syndrome terribly. And I was like, me too, me too. And that's the funny thing. I think a lot of the stuff that we admit to ourselves when we're really honest, it's kind of liberating when you express it out there and say, yeah, I'm not the only one. I feel this way. I bleed like everyone else. Look me, I bleed. And I think that what happens with a lot is that now we relate more to that than the person who says, hey, I'm super successful and I've got it all worked out, because no one really wants to have a conversation with that guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it could even be true. I mean, but like I said, what is success? Is it, from what metric are you evaluating success? For me, peace of mind is a big one. Being the best version of myself possible, whatever that means, because I don't even know what that means. But if I feel like I escaped the hamster wheel, I have broken a pattern that's been there forever, I'm not repeating myself. It feels like I have moved in the game, so to speak. Yeah. A different level of the game. It will be new challenges for sure, and I think that's one of the things about being incarnated here. And I think it's when you have more people talking about it, it's great, because it's a different metric to look at your life.
Having exactly that ability to be honest and have that open conversation, and invite other people to join in and share that, is probably the most thankful part of the role, because again, no one wants to feel alone. Plus, if life is a journey, not a destination, I want to be in the car with people that I like. And it's nice to be able to, as you go along the journey, it's like you're in a bus and you're picking up people at the bus stop and they're like, yeah, I'm like you, and jump on board. And this is a great forum to have that conversation, because there is no, we have things figured out individually to a degree, each and every one of us, some more, some less, but the sharing of it helps piece the jigsaw puzzle together and make the picture come into focus a little bit more. And I know I can say I'm thankful more than anything to be in a position that I get to meet people every day, and they get to open up to me and say, yeah, this is really what I need and what I want. And I can help them go down that rabbit hole and say, kind of, like when you're on that hotline, what you think you need or want to do is not what you want to do. Right. You just need to process that a little bit more, and I'll help you, and I'll give you input from the environment as I see it, because I live in this environment, and I'll give you input that will help you, and hopefully in the end the decision will be one that you're happy with, rather than getting the quick dopamine hit. So we're just talking about the environment and going through where people live, and environments can strengthen or weaken them. And in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, there's areas of Sao Paulo that would be considered, a hostile environment, a challenging environment to live, or not even that. Let's say positive. Let's use the word positive. Positive environment, positive for you. Negative, not good for yourself, not good for family. How do you navigate how do you see people effectively navigating the Sao Paulo city environment for the good, to be mentally healthy and the healthy space?
I think there is one way we all have to, in a way, play different roles in society, right? I mean, there is David, the father, David, the businessman. There is David, the podcaster. And you'll be navigating through very different environments all the time. But I think when we talk about something healthy, I like to refer to a group that I call your mighty companions. What does that mean? You have to be able to have real conversations. You have to be able to have conversations in what we call a safe space, where you can actually be yourself, that you can actually, because to a certain extent, it's hard to actually just, be the real you all the time.
Isn't that what friendship is? Just sitting down with friends and having really honest conversations, being open and being who you are.
It should be. And if you go back to what friendship actually should mean, you should be able to talk about, have this kind of conversation that we're having with your close friends. Otherwise, it's just another situation that's going to drain your energy. And we will be navigating in places where, until you actually train yourself to see beyond the mask that people have to wear to play that role, until you train yourself to do that, it drains a lot of energy. So you have to refuel that battery somewhere. And so you have to have those people that you can actually sit down and go through your week and go, this is what happened to me. This is how I acted. This is how I reacted. And actually even make fun of yourself.
That's like the ideal Friday night, have a drink with friends and family and say, yeah, this is how my week sucked. Let me share it with you.
Yeah, and that's, I think, how we started the podcast, by having those conversations. And, how...
It's cathartic,
it's very cathartic, by looking back at yourself. I said, oh, man, I believe my role, that character again. And we have this saying in the podcast, I flipped my car in a straight road.
The visual there it's not lost on me. I often feel this in Miami. Miami has a certain impression. There's a stereotypical preconceived idea of what Miami's like. And if you go online, I know a lot of people, they go on YouTube and they will put in Miami luxury condos or homes or neighborhoods. And what they're looking for is an understanding of the environment. And what that means is an understanding of what are the people like in these areas. Would I find people in this neighborhood that I would feel I would be able to sit with on a Friday night and tell them I flipped my car on a straight road? And I know that within Miami, there are areas, I'll be really honest, there are areas which I feel are not maybe the healthiest environments for certain types of people. Just to be clear, not everyone, but certain types of people. Certain families are not best fitted to certain neighborhoods. There's parts of Miami which are very much, you come here for fun. It's alive. It's energized. It's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it's where you're going to live and it's your home and you're raising your kids, you might choose a slightly different area. You might choose Coral Gables and Coconut Grove over, say, I don't know, let's say south of 5th or South Beach. But I feel like everyone's always in search of that community, those groups of people that they can make friends with and really bond with, especially when they're coming from somewhere else. They don't know anyone and they're like, I hope I can find someone that I can sit down with and have a really honest conversation, find commonality, have a laugh, make fun of myself in the process and each other, and do in a healthy way where we can all look at just the journey that we're on and enjoy the journey for all its ups and downs. And I think that's something that I have loved, honestly, more than anything, is bringing people into the city, into a neighborhood, the neighborhood I live right now, Ponce Davis, which is fantastic. Having people who start off as, let's say, clients, who become close friends, that I find myself sitting in front of 2 or 3 years after they've moved here, having a drink on a Friday night, laughing about the silly nonsense of our week, and really being vulnerable, honest, candid, and human.
Right.
And that, to me, is what we're all looking for in our environment. That's the environment we want to be in.
And you probably won't find that initially in the group, because group behavior is very different from individual behavior within the group. But I think that everyone, not everyone, but people want to have that kind of conversation. They want to be able to sit down with other people and be vulnerable and be honest about, even make fun of themselves, like I said. But I wouldn't expect to find that in group behavior.
You just find it, search it out individually. So when you move in, maybe some of the advice might be, if you're moving into somewhere, an area, or into a new environment, search out the individuals to connect with them.
Yeah, I got one-on-ones,
Yeah.
Start getting to know people, where they're coming from, and eventually you're going to find a lot of things in common, because like the saying goes, everyone's fighting a war that we know nothing about.
Amen to that. I think we pretty much covered a good amount. I want to thank you for doing this. I'm going to look more deeply into your podcast. I know it. I know of it. I know people who listen to it. I know how much value it brings to many people. I hope that those who have watched this podcast are curious to know more. And if you are a Brazilian speaker and you speak Portuguese, then tune in to Elephants in the Mist.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here. It's I love to have those conversations. I never had it in English, in any podcast in English, so it was a different experience. But in a way, I mean, a lot of the material that we get is in English, so I think it's sometimes easier to use the references.
Oh,
but I'm sure your podcast is going to go a long way. Congratulations on what you've done so far. And I'm sure we're going to meet again, maybe in Elephants in the Mist, interviewing Dave Siddons. Better decisions.
Beautiful. Thanks, you.
Brother.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't seen our other episodes, please go back. There's 64 of them. And if you like this, if you'd like to give input, please DM message us below. Give us your input. Give us your comments. See my details below. And stay tuned for another episode of the Better Decisions podcast coming soon.